This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such an material motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Jack. Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 263. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we have some brother podcasters here to join us for, I think, an interesting, wide-ranging discussion about a lot of stuff that both of our shows, I think, are pretty, obsessed with or fixated on and dwell upon. We have with us Dick and Don from Fourth Reich Archaeology. How you boys doing?
Doing great. Thank you very much for having us on, and we're excited to be here.
Thank you for coming on. We've been, definitely followers, viewers, appreciate your presence online from early on, and definitely have a aligned approach to things. So we're glad to have finally made this happen.
It's been it's really great to be here. Thank you for having us. I would say that we sort of complement each other very well. In your intro, you have that George Bush, the conspiracy theorists will say what they will. And we pick up right there at the end of that, where you all leave off, I think we pick up. So it's
right.
Because the rest of that saying, that's at Jerry Ford's eulogy, I think, right?
You're right. I was just thinking that, and that's also when he says, in November 1963, when a deluded gunman, and then he smiles for a second, shot President Kennedy.
Right.
No, there's a lot in that Jerry Ford eulogy. It's dripping with dracularity, as we would say.
Yeah. Because I think the rest of the line is the Warren report will be the final word because Jerry Ford put his name on it.
That's right.
I absolutely I agree. I think it's great to be here, brothers. I think we're all in pursuit of the same goal, the same sort of. We got to get out of this thing,
The wilderness of mirrors. We need to smash it and escape from it. It's basically.
It's pretty nuts. It's pretty nuts.
Mm-hmm. And what a time, this episode has been gestating for a bit now. I think for a couple months we've talked about it's almost an embarrassment of riches. I feel like there's so many topics that we could have kind of dug into, whether more specific historical ones or broader things. But I think fate has led us to right now, and I feel like it had to be this way because we're recording this on the 9/11 week, several days after September 11th on Sunday. And what a week for mass trauma, ritual discourse, and the ontological ops rearing their heads and everything else. Of course, this is 5 days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah.
4 days, right? It happened on the 10th.
4 days.
It was one day before 9/11. Yeah,
that's how you can tell it was. It really clocked us good. Is that time sort of dilates and the discourse vortex kind of sucks you in. I feel like so many people are commenting I got nothing done this week, and I was really
Yeah,
I was struggling with that as well.
We've collapsed into like a national like frenzy, like a strange like orgiastic like reverie over this. But I do think that like deliberate or otherwise, I don't like probably not designed by like one singular master intellect or architect, but it's definitely like there were like powerful and like evocative like ritual elements to what happened that I think like excited the imagination of, or like ignited the imaginations of a lot of people.
There's
like
plenty
the
of
setting
seeds of
it.
psychosis buried in there.
It's crazy you mentioned 9/11.
It's so rich.
It's crazy you mentioned 9/11 because I'm sorry to say I did forget that it's 9/11 week, and there is, like you say, the ritualistic. There's like a seasonality to these things. They're repeated with such consistency at this point, where this spectacle just happens, and this time it just so happened to coincide with 9/11 week, but it's like we're at it again and again and again at this point. It's nauseating.
Yeah, and on that point, on our podcast right now, we're gearing up for a big series on the double assassination attempts on Gerald Ford.
Right.
And
I'm really excited about that, by the way. Like, very under-examined, like, for how fucking weird they are, right?
And 50 years ago, we're right in the middle of those two attempts. That was exactly 50 years ago. September 5th was the first one, and the 22nd was the second one. So it's like having been in the mindset of imagine a world where political assassination is popping off in a major way in the U.S., and everybody is putting their marker down to try and take advantage of the situation and the chaos it creates, and then boom, the Charlie Kirk net gusher hits the internet, and everybody loses their fucking minds.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's funny that I've been thinking a lot about, like the sort of psychosis or like a psychosis responses kind of that like it sort of generated and, among the population, and also like the desperate attempts. And I mean, there's so many layers of this, but like, regardless of like what really happened there, to like slot it into a narrative that could be weaponized immediately.
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah.
Like,
we were just talking about how it was amazing the first 18 hours before like things really developed, how quickly the conspiracies came together.
It's amazing how like the party responsible was like entirely beside the point, and like openly so. Like, it didn't matter, like, who this person was. Like, already it was decided that, like, okay, well, now we are going to, like, crack down on, like, leftist organizations, on, like, campus protesters, on, like, basically any opposition to, like, the beliefs of Charlie Kirk in general. And like, we're going to just actively persecute because of this, because they are in some way collectively responsible.
And that shows you, I think we were just talking about this off air, but it's like, it shows you how broken things are right now. Like how quickly all of that stuff was able to come together. It's nuts, man.
Yeah. Well, there's this whole like terrain now that's like preceded so that when any one of these like spectacular violent events like does occur, like the trans shooter, blah blah blah, like that's already like on the shelf, ready to like immediately put into deployment, and and then kind of the only like the main response to that from like liberals is like it's gun violence, just like it's gun violence, and I'm like it is. It's also like how many other countries have this problem? I mean, during the Cold War there were a few for sure. I mean,
well,
it's
the gun
not an
culture
exclusive
of America,
to America thing.
I wouldn't, not
but
to
I mean, the
be
gun
a lib,
culture
but
thing.
Like, we can't excuse that element of our culture.
In a way, I think it's extra pertinent to the Charlie Kirk situation, because if he's sort of known for anything, one of his most like enraging positions was kind of like downplaying like school shootings and mass shootings and being like, yeah, whatever. So the fact that he gets popped at like a public event is like
in the middle of a comment.
It's too ironic to not point out for like the opponents of, sort of liberal opponents of Charlie Kirk is like, that's too ironic. Like you died the way that you kind of live by the sword, die by the sword a little bit.
Well,
in terms of downplaying it. But I mean, even our gun culture, there's like an on top of like American gun culture that is like deep.
Yeah, I mean, I
obviously
say that
helps all this function.
I say that in sort of acknowledgement that I think like there's a big impulse, like both among libs and among like obviously among like conservatives of all stripes, like to sort of say like this is a political culture of like a partisan with a partisan dimension to it, where like one side is like believes in political violence and like it's like, well, no, it's obvious that like political violence is like becoming normalized like on both sides, and it's also I think fairly obvious that like this wasn't like a deeply ideological act, something that was done in the name of like I mean, there might be like hidden dimensions. Like I'm not like ruling out the possibility that like, Israel did it to make Charlie Kirk into a martyr, like that sort of theory, even though I think like some of the kind of like post hoc like hagiography of Charlie Kirk is like this brave like okay, like let's not like go so deep into this that like we like deny like actually what was bad about Charlie Kirk like above all else, which is that's the thing. Like, I mean, you talk about the contradictions, and this came to my mind as well, like in terms of the topic for the episode, which you guys, Dick and Don, suggested of popping the ontological Nazi bubble and reading through the notes and the idea of this about sort of the contradictions in American liberalism. And I think that like that really, in terms of like the ritual elements or the sort of symbolic elements, whatever you want to say, of this event, like that is something that like really comes like irresistibly to the fore, like that. And you can see it in the discourse as well. Like he, was in this public square underneath the signs is like, prove me wrong, like the embodiment of this like liberal ideology of like free speech and the public square. And, is debating like the nature of violence and then gets like blasted, of course. But that's the thing, like, it brings in this contradiction of like the problem of like, speech. And like, for instance, Charlie Kirk, he would say that like he would justify things like, the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. He would justify like people being killed for like no other reason than that they simply existed in a place that like Israel felt it was entitled to. Like what was really like so wretched about Charlie Kirk as a person was like, and that's the thing when people were like, oh, you're erasing his humanity. He was a father. He was a young man like with a wife and kids. And it's like, well, but the reason why people disliked him was because like his entire career was built in denying the humanity of others and justifying violence. I mean, it's definitely a tricky question. I would prefer not to go down this slope, like of saying like, okay, well, words are violence and they can merit like, violent retaliation because like, that's the idea that like Charlie Kirk like felt was bad, that, oh, Palestinians say this or they read that, so like therefore they're all guilty, like that type of like a belief. But
even the quote that was circulating so much where he said, it's worth the cost of excess deaths by gun violence to preserve our Second Amendment freedom, which is sacred beyond the lives of whoever is needlessly killed by random shootings or mass shootings or whatever the topic at hand was, that he becomes a perfect Nazi martyr of sorts to bring this to the fore. And it kind of plays right into the idea, I think, of the ontological Nazi bubble, because you have the liberal establishment, by and large, lining up with the extremism embraced by Kirk, which clearly has an impact in the real world, whether on policy or on just the discourse and the acceptability of violence inflicted abroad, overseas, or domestically against Black people and immigrants, especially, right? He, I think, was in the middle of making a statement when he got shot that was, if you decode the statement that he was making, which is like, well, do you count gang violence among mass shootings?
Right, yeah.
like
right. It was kind of apropos of nothing, which was like, I think the guy was obviously making a point that like trans people are a small percentage of mass shooters, but then like somehow he pivoted it. Like the way that he was talking about it almost made it, he was going to say like, well, you know, all these trans gangs out there, like if you include them, but
which ironically is now being alleged that like he must like everyone, you know, social media was awash with like rumors that like an Antifa trans like network, a cell. Like I kept saying like it's a cell, like, you know, like there's the tactical squad out there, you know. And
no, but his point was it was a racist point, right, Don?
Like, it was.
Ultimately,
it's they don't those stats don't count.
No, it's like black people are responsible for most mass shootings or whatever.
Right. Yeah. That like well, gang violence like really adds to the number of mass shootings, and like that's black people. But it was very tangential to what they were talking about. But of course, he couldn't resist bringing it up. But yes, like it's
so his lionization by the mainstream media, you know, MSNBC having fired a guy just for tweeting violent words create violent thoughts, which cause violent actions. I think it is Matthew Dowd or something like that. It was an MSNBC guy who tweeted that, and they fucking fired him just for saying that.
Violent thoughts lead to violent words. To violent actions.
That's not even remotely the spiciest thing I saw, you know, said about in terms of, you know, being like disrespectful to his memory or something like that. Like, you know, that's pretty mild, I feel like, given his career, which was like rage baiting. Like he got rich and influential off of being a professional rage baiter.
I guess the impression is that like he deserved to be murdered because of his speech, which brings up like a fundamental contradiction of liberalism. I think the reason why you see people like Ezra Klein coming out to be like Charlie Kirk, like he was practicing politics the right way, is because like he was like in a way like practicing politics according exactly to like the the consummate liberal vision. Like he was going into a public square and like arguing with people, like, and you know the contradiction, or like a major contradiction, was that like he like a lot of his speech was to kind of underwrite and to support and to rationalize the violence of like the American empire. In particular,
that's a good
with respect
point,
to
though. That's actually a good point, though, to think about him in like the broader definition of a liberal, and in the sense that I think that is partly why you have like the Ezra Kleins going out there and being like, wait, like we just have to like respect this, because what he was doing was, even as provocative as his whole shtick was, like he was going out there and he was making arguments for like the selective application of like violence like by the state, and then also sort of like allowing a certain amount of violence among like the general population, say like via the Second Amendment and like right to defend yourself. That is like, that's literally what liberalism is like mediating like class violence like through, you know, the institutions, right? Through the courts. Like, you know, we should prosecute gang members. We should use ICE to like, you know, it is technically laundered through like a legal system, even if like we would recognize a lot of the actions as, you know, unjust or even, you know, murderous, like especially in the case of like our overseas empire, right?
Yeah, and the intellectual debasement of liberalism in the modern American landscape too, where once upon a time, there may have been some requirement for intellectual coherence in putting together these ideas. And now I feel like a person like Charlie Kirk, who's not, is not like the greatest mind of his generation or even close to that. He's like an effective propagandist with a lot of early backers in the, you know, pundit horse race. I remember hearing several years ago, I think the first time I heard about him was I was, for some ungodly reason, listening to Candace Owens, and she was like blathering on about how he's going to be the leader of the next movement in the next generation and bring forward the MAGA ideas with this great intellectual power behind it, and this liberal It was kind of what you were just talking about, Khalid, about the liberal paraphernalia behind him. And at the same time, like, there's no real coherence because his whole Second Amendment thing is for whites only, really. It's like, it's both Confederate in its outlook on what American national identity ought to be, and it's also sort of making appeals to these great values that animate the Declaration of Independence or whatever, which I guess in the terms of the Fourth Reich and the actual roots of the fundamental incoherence at the heart and soul of the American imperial project on this continent is that it was freedom and liberty for all whites, including the liberty and freedom to enslave other people.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I like, in like relation to this, like partially in reading your notes, I was reminded of this book by Paul Kahn, putting liberalism in its place. Yeah, I put it in the notes document, but I definitely recommend this book. Like, a lot of this book resonates like intensely with the present moment. And yes, I was thinking like this, these same ideas like this he talks about, and he like draws a lot on Carl Schmitt, actually, obviously, who of course was like a very enthusiastic Nazi, and kind of theorizing liberalism. And I might talk about this a bit more later. But apropos of this, he talks about how one of the greatest contradictions of liberalism is the fact that like the sort of political reality in which liberalism plays out doesn't really map onto like the theory of liberalism. Like, the theory of liberalism is that like, yeah, all people are equal and all people like have this sort of share in this idealized like discursive space. Like he says like liberalism models the political community as kind of an enlarged university, actually, which, I thought of in sort of the context of this event and this killing at a university. But, the sort of idea is like, yeah, it's this abstract space, kind of what behind the Rawlsian veil of ignorance, or, the Hobbesian state of nature. But really, like, the way that like liberal ideas play themselves out are within like a political community where people have certain commitments, people experience like loves and community bonds and things like that. And the United States, like, our community is organized based on, and the right wing brings up this contradiction very strongly, like these days, like blood and soil, right? Like people like have American citizenship based on their descent or on like being born here, right? Basically an accident of their birth, or maybe like the, intention of their parents to have them born in this country so that they'll have that right of citizenship. But that is like a core contradiction in the idea, like the sort of the theory of liberalism, the theory of this like, totally equal playing field of sort of discourse and self-fashioning as part of the popular will is, that like, like in order to participate in, there is this deep inequality in, the like American liberalism, as Dimitri said, in the broad sense. I'm not talking about like liberals versus conservatives, liberalism as like the ideological bedrock of
classical
like
liberalism.
Classic, exactly, as you often hear some people invoke.
The other part of it is the contradiction is these experiences, we've been alienated from them, right? In this new era where everything is commodified, you're not even discourse is commodified, and it's you're not able to have these authentic experiences, the ones you were just talking about. Everything is, you're online, it's digital, it's people have been alienated from the actual discourse.
Yeah, it's true. And the like, in a way, the internet is kind of that abstract space where you can be anyone, and like everyone is kind of this, vague floating subject who can make up like their own persona, and everything is circulating. In theory, there's something interesting about this. But but I think that like, for some people, like people who are drawn to like the ideas of the far right in the current political context, like, they are thinking like, probably you've seen like the the famous heat map meme, like famously, you know, based on like a very poorly chosen graphic from like a study that wasn't really meant to suggest what it's commonly interpreted to be. But, you know, this is the idea that like, yeah, like family comes first, right? Like that's what conservatives sort of express through their use of that meme. The idea that liberals, like, they value what they think is that liberals value like rocks and trees over their own family, which of course is not true. But it is true that people who identify as liberal tend to see, you know, people in other countries, for instance, or people outside their family, to have moral value equal, you know, to the people in their family, right? But that's, you know, conservatives maybe feel differently, that like their family, the moral value ends maybe before it reaches all of humanity, or even very far outside one's close circle, right?
Didn't J.D. Vance just have that argument with the Pope a few months ago?
Yeah, the Ordo Amoris. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same idea that like you should prioritize like your family over others. Yeah, exactly. Which I think is, as I understand it, like if I recall correctly, not the right understanding of Ordo Amoris for this concept. But regardless, yeah, it's the same principle that you know, people have these like communal bonds that come first, and that is like how people experience politics, like through that lens a lot of the time. And so when it comes to this sort of abstract space, when those two things collide, you know, you get a very difficult to resolve conflict, or even a very difficult to theorize conflict.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of have you ever done one of those murder mystery games where each person gets like a character, and you have like your character sheet that says what are your biases, what are your beliefs, what are your motives, kind of thing. And that's what internet media silos are kind of like. That, you know, an event happens, the murder, you know, quite on the nose in this case, and then everybody, based on their character, their internet identity that's fed and mediated by all of these filters and targeted psyops, whether coordinated or not, that inform their beliefs about what happened and what the significance is and what they can accept for the next steps and what they want to oppose for the next steps. And there's just a huge artifice around the whole thing. And this is where I think it becomes visible as a Nazi bubble that is on the verge of maybe popping, or is susceptible to being popped, because you have, you know, the MSNBC reaction, for example. I know that is going to piss off a lot of libs, a lot of like MSNBC brained libs who do see the headlines quoting Kirk's reprehensible views on whatever, like some of his IQ stuff, that he talks about black women being cognitively inferior and unable to hold any position of authority without the mechanism of affirmative action displacing a deserving white for that role. And they see that, and then they see MSNBC's response to protecting this guy and to, you know, galvanizing support, everybody from Barack Obama to Ezra Klein, as you mentioned, and everyone in between on that side of the sort of mainstream lib block, and feel something doesn't quite jive there.
Yeah, I mean, I think like reactions kind of run the gamut, because, and it is an interesting question, because like some of what you, I mean, I'm referring somewhat to the notes a bit, but like some of what you talked about is like, okay, well, you know, what is the futurity of this? Like, what's the end game? Which is interesting to talk about, because it does, I think that like for some of those people, not for all, for some, like, you know, I think like maybe there's a certain sympathy with like a sort of almost a class solidarity that you see, where people see themselves as like kind of these like influencers and like the part of a commentariat, and so they see themselves like under threat. And I think that almost is like a better analysis of what's going on than one based on like partisan politics and like the leftist terrorists versus like the right wing that is truly believing in civil rights or whatever. But I think that like, in terms of, I think the issue is like, are we going to say that Charlie Kirk, I mean, obviously, like, I think Charlie Kirk is going, well, if he doesn't go to hell, it will be through like the, profound mercy of Allah. But like, so I don't like have any like warm feelings for Charlie Kirk. I mean, I do think it's valuable to try, like in any case, to see someone's humanity. And in fact, that is what separates us, or should separate people like, us from people like Charlie Kirk, who's basically his entire like life was dedicated to dehumanizing people. But I think the question is like, are we going to go down a road where we retaliate against people like that who aren't being violent in the, conventional sense? And again, we can talk about like how there's systemic links between, his like the ideas that he expresses and violence, like material ones and ideological ones. But I think like, there's a fear that is in some respects justified, where it's like, okay, are we going to start going down a road where, when you can already see, like, that some people are eager to go down this road, right?
Oh,
They're
it's one of the
eager
roles in the murder mystery
reprisals.
game, for sure.
Yeah.
The ultra-leftist
Yeah.
who's going to start the fucking SLA 2.0 out there.
Right, mashing the support
oh,
of
yeah,
terrorism.
like,
And I was
Luigi
I was
is the
thinking,
most base guy ever, and we need 1 million Luigis every day. And
Right.
I was thinking more of like the right, actually, like, because they would love for that to happen. Like, in fact, they already seem to be suggesting that, like, the people who, I don't know, whatever, like have certain politics are like somehow collectively guilty and they deserve to suffer and die.
Like,
and that
like the
is,
Infowars guy,
happening.
the Infowars
Harrison,
guy, Harrison
whatever.
Smith, who simultaneously was like, I heard from a friend of Charlie Kirk that he was afraid that Israel was going to kill him, and then like also like hours later was like, we need to put all leftists in camps.
That's a great example of like the
what?
effect of the internet, because like like obviously like conspiracies about Israel, which again, people who know our show know that like I'm not in any way defending Israel or even ruling out like the possibility that Israel may like there is some like at first I was like, what, like he was their strongest soldier, but I actually did find like some of the narratives of that to be kind of persuasive, that maybe he kind of crossed the threshold of being like more useful dead than like possibly turning into another Tucker Carlson. But even even that aside, like it shows like how like there's whatever gets engagement, it doesn't like those two views are like completely incompatible, and they like completely
so
like
contradictory.
they don't
like,
make
if
any sense.
Israel murdered this guy in like a kind of false flag, like manipulative, like psyop way to like send a message to right-wing influencers, blah blah blah, like why would then like the next logical step being to like lock up leftists who are like, at least certainly among like the liberal, half of the country, are like the most anti-Israel people,
and
like
still in general the most anti-Israel people.
Yeah,
like those on the
like,
right who are anti-Israel are like a small minority, and usually their motives like are not necessarily like a concern with justice or anything like that.
But the Rex 84 like mindset kind of like he just snaps back to like default programming, which is like, oh, leftists are the threat. And like, I think the other thing I wanted to point out with all
this, before you move on, it does show this internet thing where like, because the algorithm kind of dictates like, well, I can get more views if I say this and this. Why would I choose one? It shows how like that kind of, it shows how like that pattern, like that sort of reinforcement of that kind of behavior actually then creates like a new logic, a new ideological logic, or a new ideology, where it's like, okay, these things aren't actually incoherent because both are getting attention. And like, I don't have to address the incoherencies of these things because the algorithm rewards both. And I think that like that's a great way of understanding like some aspects of American politics. But anyway, you were.
And then each time they do that to try and resolve an irreconcilable contradiction, the little insect farts into the bubble and it inflates a little bit more. I think in a few minutes maybe we could zoom out and talk about the ontological aspect and kind of rewind to the conceptual level, but just putting the marker down for now.
Yeah, I guess maybe the final thing before we jump into that, because I think it might be relevant. It's interesting. I was thinking about it from the very beginning of this conversation when you brought up Gerald Ford and Sarah Jane Moore and Squeaky Fromm, the two women that tried to kill him, and all the way up till today with like Luigi and with like this new guy Tyler, this Mormon gamer kid, and then Crooks, the kid who tried to shoot, who shot at Trump. Like, it's interesting given how, like, I mean, conservatives today will still talk about like they tried to kill Trump and talk about like either Iran did it or like clearly it was like leftists and blah blah blah. But like from those girls in the 70s up through like the just last week with the Charlie Kirk shooter, like the one thing they actually tend to have in common is just completely like brain fried, incoherent politics. Like in a sense, the shooter, the actual agent of these acts, often, and you could throw in Lee Harvey Oswald as well in like a kind of confused way, like, oh, he's like kind of I think we know there's a lot going on there, but like not exactly like a clear motive, like, which is in previous assassinations and before the kind of modern era, you tended to have, you'd have kind of like disturbed people, but like usually they'd have some kind of like reason why they did it. And they usually would get caught or whatever and like announce to the world like why they did this act and, whatever. And it wasn't like a huge mystery to figure out why they did it. But now, like nowadays, ever since, a little program called MK Ultra was, maybe developed or something, it seems like you get these like almost like PTK'd people that don't have a clear sense of their own like agents of like, their own ideology and whatever, and somehow get kind of tracked and fixated on or directed to like doing these attacks, and then like the effect is the effect. I mean, people tend to like politicize, like the impact gets politicized no matter what. If you're killing like RFK or Martin Luther King or Charlie Kirk, like you're gonna get some kind of political reaction out of it just like off the jump. So it's not like it neutralizes like the effects on society by having it be like an inscrutable, somebody with inscrutable politics, but like I can see the pressure to like give this guy some kind of ideology that like makes so we can make sense of it and draw conclusions from it. But it's like a stubborn thing that they don't know why they're doing it, and it's like not easy to even if they live, like they can't really explain it. And so I don't know, that makes me think a little bit about like I don't know, the function of sort of false consciousness and like a non-self-awareness that particularly I feel like is a huge hallmark of like American political culture, and I think has something to do with this Nazi ontological bubble.
I have a favorite Karl Rove quote. I'll just quickly just tossing in this Karl Rove quote that really everybody should have right in their brain Rolodex because it's so descriptive. So Karl Rove said, in the 2000s when he was Bush's man.
I think I know the one you're going to read. I think, but
it's probably is that
classic.
one. Yeah. So he said, "We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do." That's kind of...
And who was he addressing when he said that? Because I've heard that before. But
a journalist, I think.
Oh, a journalist.
I think he was at like a White House dinner or function or something. And I'm pretty sure it was like a Washington journalist that was talking to him. And he was like, look, journalist, like, we create history. I think. I could be wrong.
You're right. It was in, I think it was Suskind. Ron Suskind. I think so, that he was writing a book. And it was first unattributed, quoted in the book, and then later was revealed to have been Karl Rove.
Right. And I remember seeing that at the time when I was like a teenager and being like, that was one of those kind of what the fuck, like, like people didn't used to kind of talk, didn't seem like they would talk openly about such things in such an evil empire kind of way, but here we are. And now it's like in a weird way that, oh, that's just Trump on like a Tuesday. Like he might not say it as eloquently, but he would say some shit like that.
Alternative
right? Like,
facts.
You know,
remember alternative
Well, he
facts?
definitely at least intuitively knows that better than maybe even Karl Rove did.
Right.
Like
he put
the
it into
ability,
practice.
the ability to create like one's own reality, and that like, you know, exactly, the alternative facts, if you like enact and realize the alternative facts, the like, you know, the prior facts cease to matter, is definitely like a doctrine that he implements.
Right.
From Roy Cohn.
Trump is living it. Karl Rove said it. Trump is living it.
I'm eager to telescope out, but you know, I did want to say, like, relative to the last thing, is that I also think, like, you know, even when I think there's still like some things that are murky about this, like Assassin, and you know, but obviously there are like some shooters where they're like, you know, mass shooters where their ideology is like totally like incoherent, or even when that incoherence is in some way the point, which I think is the case with like the 09A and the COM and this type of stuff. But but also I think that like in some respect, like when people are killers, like that is also like really paramount, like, you know, more so than like any ideological dimension. Like if you're someone who's like, I'm gonna commit murder, you know, that is also like a salient thing that like sort of sets you apart from most, you know, that you are someone for whom it seems, you know, like a reasonable thing to do to kill a stranger or someone whom you know, that is, you know,
or a famous, powerful person.
Like it's
that's true. I mean, that gets lost in a lot of the ideological debate, because it kind of gets it almost gets implied by the discourse that, oh, if this person had like radical left,
like being a leftist
politics,
is the most important thing, and the fact that like he was a murderer is secondary. You know,
yeah,
or, like leftists are the party of murder,
shares...
as Elon said, and that like leftist values are the values of murder, which is certainly, you know, not true. I mean, I think there's an interesting question where it's like the question of political violence and the question of political change through violence, and I guess the question of violence, Charlie Kirk's very last word, you know, is like a deeper one. But you know, like,
but yeah, to imply that anybody like with, you know, because the shooter had leftist politics, everybody with leftist politics might become a shooter. Like that's kind of what's being implied in all this like hysterical discourse, when in fact, like the percentage of people, admittedly, even on both sides, even in like the gun loving right, like the percentage of people that are gonna like strap up and go like shoot people is like an infinitesimally small vanguard of like disturbed, you know, people, and even at that point you might even start to look at like broader social factors, like, I don't know, like I hate to say, but like maybe Tipper Gore was a little more maybe vindicated. No, actually, people used to insult us by calling us like the Tipper Gore podcast or something.
She's vindicated. She's
a little vindicated
again. She's
like the way people were like first-person shooters will make you violent, and it's like, I know it's not one-to-one, but
Army
like
pay them a shitload of money to advertise, and why do they recruit using video games as a mechanism? Like, there's obviously something to it.
Yes.
Yeah,
it desensitizes you to the act of looking through a scope and blasting someone's head. No question about it. If you do that virtually with like pretty realistic like graphics these days, you know, like I understand people were like, oh, you can, like back when people had like N64 square heads, but now it's like, you know, especially in this AI-ified, mediatized world, like, you know, but yeah, you're basically just like repeating that action over and over and over. Like it makes it easier, obviously.
And all these games are also like replete with the type of like background propaganda. Like Activision like partners with like the CIA and the Pentagon to like make all those like, you know, Call of Duty games and shit. And they always have, I think that I've seen people you know, reference that, oh yeah, and like Black Ops 4 or whatever, like there was a whole thing about like Delta Force like overthrowing the government of Mexico or like invading Venezuela, and like they almost like forecast out like future potential conflicts to almost like catch the next generation that might be fighting in them, to like just see these ideas of, and it's always done in kind of like this just kind of like straight to the core, like operator kind of way. That's not like directly engaging. It's really about the action and about being an operator and the experience. And like, I mean, even shit that's made by like liberal filmmakers, like that movie Warfare that came out earlier this year. Like several people kind of like spoke highly of it or like recommended it as like, oh, this is cool. And it's like, it's just like a movie about like a battle in Ramallah in like 2006 with like some Navy SEALs. And it's like, okay, like I know that it's not political, it's just experiential, it's just about these guys in a situation, and it's filmed so realistically and stuff, but it's like that's still propaganda for like the US war machine. Even on a non-explicit level, you're going to form a sympathy with like these soldiers, and like you're not going to think about the larger context. It's going to be like a video game, and it's just about like going for the ride. There's a weird, once again, the kind of like non-self-aware nature of kind of like American imperial fascism is like I think it's an important thing maybe to focus on, because like, for example, you know, your guys' show is called Fourth Reich Archaeology. Like this term, the Fourth Reich, has been around for, you know, a number of decades. I think that, I don't know actually who was the first person to like coin it, but I know that some like old school kind of lefty conspiracy like radio hosts, people like, you know, Dave Emery,
Jim Marrs had it in a book, I think.
Jim Marrs, that sounds very
a long time ago.
Yeah, but this kind of older generation, like post JFK assassination conspiracy theory people kind of said it, and
our audio clip in the intro song is Gregory Peck saying Fourth Reich in the movie Boys from Brazil.
You know what's funny? I actually watched that last night. That was by for some reason I felt like to prepare for this episode I should rewatch Boys from Brazil, and that's an interesting movie. Actually, it kind of touches in a weird way on American, like the potential for American fascism by like the boy Hitler character that grows up in Pennsylvania, and he's kind of like a black-pilled like Gen Xer who has like a little like John Fogerty kind of haircut and is like kind of a psychopath, but like he wants to be a photographer. Like it's you know, Josef Mengele clones Hitler in the movie in Brazil, and then like all these little Hitlers are raised around the world. But it kind of like I think Mengele, played by Gregory Peck, goes on this like monologue near the end about how like there's going to be a new like an American Hitler, like a Hitler for the 80s, for the 90s, for 2000, you know, and he's like talking about this kid who's like, you know, born in like 1965, that is like the genetic clone of Hitler, but he's going to grow up in America, and he thinks because he sets up enough of his early life in a similar way with like the same age parents with like an age gap, and the father has to die at 14 to like traumatize young Hitler, so they have to go assassinate all the adoptive fathers, and then an organic Hitler will, like an organic American Hitler will then like emerge around like the year 2000, probably around like he'd be around like Gavin Newsom's age now, according to the movie, you know, which is a strange movie because Josef Mengele like was real, like he did really escape to South America and was popping around doing like weird, evil, like scientific research on like Colonia Dignidad and stuff. I think he had died by the time that movie came out. He quote drowned while swimming somewhere. Maybe in 1975. But,
yeah, and protected by the U.S. government, too. I mean, there was a lot of different occasions when he was basically identified and located, and people would be like, yo, we found Mengele. Can we capture him? Can we kill him? And be like, nah. Well,
it's like poor Steve Gutenberg, like the young Jewish American kid, like in the beginning, who's like bootstrapping like, I'm gonna go like hunt Nazis, and then it's like I think one guy tells him in the beginning, like, get the fuck out of Paraguay, like you have no idea what you're dealing with, like just go get on the first flight, like and then of course he gets hunted down and like captured by, you know, Mengele, and like they kill him, you know. But no, I mean that's one place to start. So I was thinking about Fourth Reich, and like, you know, I was thinking about Americans kind of like recoiling at that and being like, what? Like us, the Fourth Reich? You know, like, and you could think of Americans across the spectrum of like liberal, conservative, whatever, like balking at that. That's kind of the reason why it's like a good term to like to provoke, you know, a conversation about, well, I think you wrote down in the notes, you know, there's a few different ways you could sort of define both the Fourth Reich and like the ontological Nazi bubble that we're talking about. On one level, it's like the idea that the Nazis are antithetical to America because we fought them in World War II, and we beat them. This is like a very big part of our modern mythos as a country, right?
Oh yeah.
And it's like it's a bedrock thing of like why we are a good force in the world is because we stood up for the side of justice, which meant allying with the Soviet Union, but like only for those 5 years. Otherwise, they're evil. And like we beat the Nazis, and then we stood up for like it's a thing that started with Woodrow Wilson, but wasn't able to really like blossom until after World War II, of like spreading like liberal capitalist representative democracy all around the world. That is the birthright of mankind, and it's like our job to stand up for that and, protect blah, blah, blah. That's what we all learn in school, right? Mm-hmm. More or less. That's what's reinforced by like pretty much every president, by our entire government, by the movies we grew up watching. And, I think we can, the first layer is like you could point to the extent to which like the U.S. government and like powerful people in the United States saved remnants of the Nazi regime. Even like very, very bad people like Klaus Barbie, like Josef Mengele, right? And the people that were most directly responsible for that in the U.S. government were the same people that built the CIA, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Allen Dulles, James Jesus Angleton, Frank Wisner, Richard Bissell, like all these kind of people that brought in the Gehlen org from Nazi Germany.
Even
Reinhard
John McCloy,
Gehlen.
even though he wasn't actually part of CIA infrastructure, he was architecturally involved in the blueprint. And of course, carrying it out as a civilian. Like, and this is the lines around the nucleus are kind of blurred, I guess, in that period too. That there's more of a class solidarity and a uniformity of ideas and of vision, even if it's not institutionally relegated to just the CIA. Like, I think that's something that I've certainly grown in the direction of shying away from like pointing the finger at just the CIA, given
it's like a metonymy, like the CIA.
Private,
like
it really means like national
partnership.
Security establishment. It's like usually what I mean when I say CIA, like these days. Yeah, it's like the overall like national defense intelligence
sense.
apparatus,
Yeah.
and like the deep political governance structures that also like things like the Council on Foreign Relations. Like it's not like a conspiracy theory. Like all the most powerful people do go there to kind of like coordinate as a class. Right, as like the ruling class, this is funded by heavily funded by the Rockefellers, the most powerful people in the country, including, of course, the intelligence services and stuff like that. But also, crucially, the bankers, the financiers, the industrialists, like all these people are. There's not really like a clear dividing line. Like I thought about. There's a great book that I was reading for Demon Forces, The CIA and the Marshall Plan by Sally Pisani. And she mentions in there that like the Rockefellers were actually hostile to the idea of a national like federal intelligence service like prior to World War II, because they already had set up such an incredible like sort of NGO apparatus in like Central and South America, and like the State Department kind of like coordinate with them and let them do whatever they want, that like they didn't want somebody else on their turf. Like they were the American intelligence presence like on the ground in like the Western Hemisphere. You know what I mean? And then I think they kind of forced out Wild Bill Donovan, according to a lot of things I've read, even though he very much was like enmeshed in he was a Wall Street lawyer, obviously, but like I think at some degrees was like not as trusted, some people say, because he hired too many lefties into the OSS during World War II. Could be other reasons for that. But like he had to get kind of like forced out, and then they, basically reformed like with the National Security Act in 1947, this new kind of agency and the National Security Council. And then even that took like a few years, like Allen Dulles sort of working from the outside to like build it up in a certain type of way, so that by the 50s you see kind of how it was meant to function, where the same people that represent United Fruit can overthrow a social democratic government in Guatemala that is threatening to like nationalize the land of United Fruit. And then all the Cabots and fucking lodges and shit that are on the board can like call up their friend Alan Dulles. And then, you know what I mean? Like it's all integrated. Like the national security apparatus is like kind of a subversive vanguard of like the capitalist ruling class.
Totally. And it's passed down generationally too. Like you were just talking about Woodrow Wilson having the facade of the 14 points, liberal international order. A lot of what we hear today from libs hand-wringing about what Trump is doing to undermine the liberal international rules-based order and all this shit, it's reminiscent of the Wilsonian democratic internationalism, which itself concealed this extreme white supremacy of both Wilson on a personal level and his Secretary of State, Robert Lansing, the uncle of the Dulles brothers.
Yep.
And
yeah, no, it literally is intergenerational in that case.
And even that effort was kind of a papering over of the exposure of this contradiction at the twilight of the age of empires, of, you know, the century of the scramble for Africa and these great power politics in the third world, building up your white fiefdoms over the people of the global south. And that's not sustainable long term. So the seeds get planted in this idea of a liberal international rules-based order, which is no less domineering. It just envisages the recruitment of a local elite to administer the empire on behalf of capital and, you know, cycling out whenever necessary the figureheads in those viceroyal positions in the colonial periphery, which continues really to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, I mean, like neo-colonialism is kind of the modus operandi of like American, specifically American imperialism and its phase. You know, it's like this, you know, post-monarchical, but at the same time, like, you know, operating, you could draw similarities like the British East India Company and like, you know, earlier like capitalist, mercantilist things. But the agenda is to like subjugate the world primarily through economics, but also through the backing of like, you couldn't really have the Wilsonian dream without like the atomic bomb and like a huge peacetime military, which is what we ended up with at the end of World War II, and all these military bases, you know, in Europe and in Asia, like just spread around the world. And I think that's the other thing with like America, because like, I know all countries like, you know, do that. This is politics to kind of like slap a narrative on what you're doing and give it loftier and more, you know, you put a fancy shine, you know, thing of
marketing,
paint on your imperialism. Exactly. There's PR, right? But I think there is almost something like very particular about, and maybe it's because we're such a capitalistic nation at our roots, and like so much has been built on kind of hucksters and entrepreneurialism and like throwing a dream out there and just seeing what sticks, you know. But like Americans, the way that Americans like are psyoped and like psyop themselves, or really are like ontopped and like see America in the world and like our relation everywhere else, is like very critical to sort of maintaining the furtherance of that empire in a way. And I mean, I don't want to like make it sound too much like I'm saying like, oh, Americans are like, they're super innocent because they don't realize what they're doing. Because I think like on some level we do, but it's been normalized and like it's fucked up, but people don't like get it. But like, do you guys as Americans, do you know what I mean? Like just how deeply like down the rabbit hole of like having this like very like kind of like blinkered American mindset that we're such a powerful country, but like we're so immature at the same time that like our elites have to like really lie and tell like fairy tales to us to like convince us to like keep spending all our tax dollars to like doing the bullshit that we do overseas and like conducting. And then anytime like another country like opposes us, like crafting this whole demonic narrative around them, and you know, which like doesn't work 100% of the time, but like, you know, especially when the prosperity was kind of pumping more in the post-war years, like they really did get everybody to kind of be like, oh yeah, okay, communism, they're the next Nazism, okay, they're bad, and like, yeah, I don't know, like, what do you guys think about that? Like maybe tying back to this class of like the Wilsonians and stuff about like the need to deceive the masses. I don't know, are they deceiving themselves? I wonder that sometimes too. We know these are cold-blooded capitalists, imperialist whatevers, Alan Dulles, like all these people. At the same time, there is that puritanical thing, right? Of like really believing that you're making the world a better place, even though you're like genociding a continent and like settling it. Like, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's like both. Like, I think that there are some things like that, you would like recognize, or like that, I mean, no one thinks that they're bad. Like people have certain beliefs that like they like that we would like recognize as bad maybe, but that they rationalize. I don't think even Stephen Miller thinks of himself as bad. Like the only people, like I don't even think Michael Aquino thinks of himself as bad. People who think of themselves as like I'm bad are like very few and far between. It's, or like who think of their actions as being like evil or wrong. Usually people like have some kind of, like people with like a healthful like mentality and like
but
like clinically
who has
speaking.
A healthful mentality in that sphere of operations though? I think there's definitely sadism amongst a certain segment of the ruling class that actually,
yes, right.
Having been researching Charles Manson a lot and the Manson family leading up to our series on the attempts on Ford, like he was always saying this thing of, what's right, what's wrong? There is no right, there is no wrong. Like you can't kill. And this kind of, it sounds ridiculous, but I think it's actually not that far from the thinking of like a Peter Thiel and some of these transhumanist types of people, that it's like, well, we tried every way to organize society and they all end up with violent human nature. And so we just got to be the ones that steer it in the direction that's going to, and then make up whatever thing. And some think that it's like
think of themselves as beyond good and evil. And that might be the case with Peter Thiel. But I think generally, yeah, people do kind of see themselves. I mean, see themselves in some ways. I guess like Charles Manson's metaphysic might have been that like he was realizing something that was like predetermined to happen, or that had to happen for some kind of eschatological reason, but there's usually like a grounding, and sadism definitely can fit into that easily. Like, for instance, do IDF soldiers believe in what they're doing? Do they believe that like they're righteous? Like, yes. Are they sadistic? Often. But they justify, do this, Abu Ghraib, the people who did that think that like there was like a justifiable reason for what they were doing. Some of it is just like, the pleasure principle or whatever. Some of it is just like, their impulses, like taking control, and like maybe after the fact, like they would have shame. It's possible. But in general, people need to have to find some kind of like matrix of like values that can like sustain what they're doing, even if like that is that is anterior to, or even if it is not anterior, but even if it's post there,
right. Even the Nazis themselves, like I remember reading something about, maybe it's something like Himmler, like a speech he gave to like in the middle of like later in the war during the Holocaust, of saying that like he like kind of acknowledged that you guys, like the things you're doing are like pretty bad, they're evil, like what you're doing, but like that's why you're such heroes, because like somebody has to go out there and do the evil things to build this amazing 1,000-year Reich that we're all fighting for. And so like you're taking like the burden of doing like the most evil shit that has to be done. Yeah. And so in a broader sense, like you're good, and I'm sure that that's how it functions for like in a lot of American contexts, like in
fact, I remember when Dick Cheney, I believe it was Dick Cheney, talked about how he would need to use the dark side in line with our recent discussion of Star Wars. He was talking about how we would need to use the dark side of intelligence in order to like accomplish our goals after 9/11, right?
Why go back to Dick Cheney? Even Charlie Kirk said gun violence is necessary if we want to preserve the Second Amendment, right?
Right,
the
yeah,
gore
exactly,
is necessary if we want to preserve this right of ours.
For the greater good, it's a common thing, that people like have to.
And I think in that foundational period with the Dulles brothers and everything, they definitely did have that belief in their own moral compass, whatever, however fucked up it is and was. And I think it owes in part to the puritanical thing and in part to this kind of mindset that is today best represented, I think, by Tucker Carlson, who also has an obsession with his ancestry and with the attachment to the American project and all this stuff, that they really believe. And this is why, going back to like the papering over the transition from colonialism to liberal internationalism, it's also kind of built into what makes the Fourth Reich framing a little bit imperfect, because that was obviously before Nazism came around.
Yeah. Right.
So that's why we're always saying like it's actually a continuity whereby this generalized like white supremacist capitalist mode of world domination takes on different forms, and it's one useful way to conceive of the current iteration, the post-Nazi unself-aware American version, as a Fourth Reich, particularly because the Nazis are holding the place for evil that is not, for example, extended to the genocidal British Empire that likewise committed innumerable atrocities leading to far more deaths than even the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust or the 10 million total victims of Nazi extermination.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, like the continuity like is key. And that's like where really the sort of epistemological like break or like the psyop like comes into play, because like often like in order to like rationalize like a war and to like justify like a war, like you need to portray your enemy. Like I'm thinking of, I was just reading the other day, that's why I'm thinking about this. I was reading Ernest Renan, who was like this, French Orientalist. I was reading this crazy address he gave when he, like in 1862, when he was taking some chair. I actually posted about it on Twitter, but like he was taking some chair in like Semitic languages or something. And he said, talking about like the difference between the Indo-European, he's very Aryanist actually. And you can see even in the 19th century, like the roots of this Aryanist idea, this contrast between Semitic peoples and Indo-European peoples sort of taking root in a colonial context that then of course came to full flower in Germany, basically, a big hub of Orientalism and Orientalist philology and all these things with the sort of rise of Nazism. But yeah, he says like that, the Mussulman or, the Muslim, I think to be fair, French people, I think still call Muslims Mussulman, but he says like, the European and the Muslim stand in the presence of one another like beings of different species. The whole thing is all about how like we are like so completely different from them and we have nothing in common with them at all. And really it's, it's about a contradiction. Like the fundamental contradiction is the issue of religion, because like Christian Europe has a Semitic religion. And he goes on like this long, like insane rant. I'm like this is the part that I posted like on Twitter. He's talking about like the destiny of Europe. As for the future, gentlemen, I foresee more and more the triumph of Indo-European genius. From the 16th century, one great fact, till then doubtful, continues to manifest itself with striking energy. It is a decided victory of Europe. It is the accomplishment of the old Semitic saying, God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Japheth being Europe and everything. Until that time,
the sons of Noah in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Japheth is the one who's sort of associated with Europe. Until that period, Semitism was master on its own ground. The Muslim East surpassed the West, had better armies and a better policy, and supplied the latter with wealth, learning, and civilization. Now their respective parts are changed. European genius has been developing itself with incomparable grandeur. Islamism, on the contrary, has been slowly crumbling away. In our times, it is falling with a crash. In the present day, the one essential condition for the expansion of European civilization is the destruction of the principle of Semitic action, the destruction of the theocratic power of Islamism, and consequently the destruction of Islamism itself. For Islamism can only exist as an official religion. To reduce it to the position of a religion, free and individual, and it will perish. Islamism is not merely a state religion like Catholicism was in France under Louis the 14th, and still is in Spain. It is a religion which excludes the state, an organization of which the papal states offer the only type in Europe. War unceasing is there. War which will only cease when the last son of Ishmael shall have died with misery or been driven by terror to the depths of the desert. Islamism is the perfect negative of Europe. Islamism is fanaticism, such as Spain in the time of Philip II and Italy in the time of Pius V scarcely knew. Islamism is contempt of science, suppression of civil society. It is the frightful weakness of the Semitic spirit, narrowing the mind of man, closing it against every delicate conception, every fine feeling, every rational research, to place it immovably in front of one unceasing tautology. God is God. And yeah, I mean, I like
Wow.
my joke
a little bit.
I mean, like the way I was like the way he's talking, you'd think that Charlie Kirk had just died. But like it's like
yeah, it does sound like today.
Yeah, like it does sound like so, like
Iran
some
something.
blue check would like post that whole thing on Twitter and you have to expand to read it. But but yeah, like you can see how this is all about like having to deal with. There's even a part where he says like in the future. The progress of European nations will consist in separating itself more and more from the Semitic mind. Our religion will retain less and less of Judaism. More and more will it resist all political organization and matters concerning the soul. It will become the religion of the heart, the inmost poetry of each human being. And basically, talking about like it's all having to deal with like this basic contradiction that like we actually follow Christianity, which is a religion that
very Protestant
in the Middle East, right? Like more than that, it's like he's kind of saying like, well, really, Christianity as we know it is mostly our work. Like everything we take from the Greeks and the Romans. We don't really get anything from them, and like basically it's trying to. The whole thing is very anxious and trying to get away from this fundamental fact. And I think you can see the same thing, like obviously,
Nazis, like,
yeah, exactly. I'm not necessarily. I'm not
religion.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Like, yeah, I wouldn't compare like obviously like I mean, and this guy kind of is the one who like invents the category of Semitic per se anyway, based on philology, like which like we could talk about the problems with that, but obviously Edward Said talks about them, but like you can definitely see the same maneuver being done where like there is like a very basic similarity, like there's a deep similarity between Christianity and Islam, like it's great, but he's like
Abrahamic
desperate to
religion.
Disavow it. And I think the same thing is at play with Nazism and American
or with
liberalism.
Zionism and Islam. Honestly, it's like they have nothing to do with like our with their Amalek, and it's like, well, they're like also based on like
Judeo-Christianity and Islam.
They are based on
Judeo-Christianity really has that basic idea in it. Like Judaism and Islam, as these people would often remark, like have much more in common than like with one another than they do with Christianity. But now post. That like is really a development of the sort of World War II period, the idea of Judeo-Christian values, which now we hear so often. But like prior to that time, anti-Semitism was like much more acceptable. That was another way that like we sought to distance ourselves from
right.
Nazis,
that was an innovation
to like
because to talk in the 19th century of like Christian values often would like lump in Jews with like the sort of Oriental other that was like not a part of our civilization kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then to signal that we're like, oh well, we could be as right wing as we could be as frothing right wing as we want, but as long as we say Judeo-Christian civilization, that's like maybe it's a tip of the hat to the Zionists to be like, oh, okay, though I feel like now Zionists will like bankroll Nazis, like
totally,
borderline Nazis, but I understand in the 50s maybe it was a little more.
Committing like like there might have been a motivation to like kind of tamp down on American anti-Semitism, which is like fair enough. I mean, like maybe Abrahamic values would have been different, but of course we can't commit to that, But
Russell used to talk about German Nazis that converted to Judaism after World War II and integrated into the apparatus of the State of Israel. I don't know. I haven't like independently verified it, but that was interesting.
I'm not sure of any particular examples, but I know that it definitely, I don't know about like integrating into the state. Definitely there were like former Nazis who advised Israel and also advised like Arab states and, other governments. And certainly the United States is, we've both talked about at like both of our podcasts. But,
famously
there were many
Skorzeny
Nazis
training the
who,
Mossad.
Yeah, exactly. And being in Egypt for a while. Gerhard Mertens was in Egypt with a bunch of Nazi officers for a while, like hooked up by the CIA to like work with Nasser. Yeah.
Khalid, as you were reading that passage from you said 1862?
Yeah.
That it was reminding me of the Napoleon's edict to the Egyptians, which was, the end of the 18th century, which is much more like, oh, friendly Egyptians, I come to liberate you from the British who don't want you to live your culture and your life. And, here we are in favor of the advancement of all human civilization, and we'll join together. And it's like that technique didn't work as well as maybe they thought it would. And so they ratchet up. Okay, time to be dehumanized, motherfuckers.
Yeah, there is like a sort of difference between like the age of like, high imperialism, like in the late 19th century. But, at the same time, like a lot of different discourses like did coexist, but they all like kind of were functioning, in this broader kind of imperial imperative to dominate and control. But definitely it's this one is like this one shocked me, honestly. Like I'm not a stranger to any of this stuff, but I was still like, damn, until the last like child of Ishmael is like dead in the desert, like it's like this crazy genocidal vision. It's really funny that he thought like without the Ottoman Empire, like Islam will just not exist. Really interesting thought, but that what brought that to my mind was this idea of like, this anxiousness to differentiate oneself, which is kind of driven by like a consciousness of like a fundamental similarity. And I think that's, definitely true in the case of like the Third Reich in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.